Welcome, soon-to-be reforged heroes, to the bleak and chaotic mortal realms, because today we're continuing our discussion of the Stormcast Eternals. And again, this is a ongoing coverage from the new 3rd edition Battle Tome that was sent to me by Games Workshop. Thank you guys so much for this. And in my last video, we introduced the faction kind of from a bird's eye view, and today we're going to go a little bit deeper. Because that video was all broad strokes, but today we're going to start exploring the various chambers of the Stormcast Eternals, because that's really, to me, where the flavor is when you kind of break it down for each unit. Because it depicts how they approach and confront the horrors of the mortal realms. Now, one thing I'd like to add right up top here, if you like this video and you're interested in this faction, please consider using the affiliate link in the description down below. Noble Knight Games is a great store in the US with discounts on all Games Workshop products, and using that link goes a long way to supporting me, my wife, and the channel. It's life-changing stuff, and I super appreciate everyone who's already done it. But for those of you who are still learning about the Stormcast, or specifically learning about how they go to war, the most basic military structures and the ones that you can most easily recognize are the storm hosts. So if we have our little flow chart of breaking down the various, what is a Stormcast Eternal from the top bird's eye view and breaking it down into more detail as we go, the next level you're going to hit, storm hosts. As Sigmar was pulling together the souls from heroes across the realms, he decided to organize them by temperament, values, and training. The logic here is that it's better to have a few storm hosts that super specialize into one aspect of war rather than just mixing them all together. And there's a lot to be said for pinpoint precision, organizing them into distinct weapons of war so he could call upon the right tool for the right job. For example, just to kind of make this very easy to grasp, the Hallowed Knights are the most religiously devout of the Stormcast Eternals. The Astral Templars are hunters, monster slayers, people who revere epic deeds of their host. And what you get when you organize, the souls of these heroes by this way, is that each storm host has a distinct warrior culture. They have values that supersede whatever weapon they use. There is something more bonding them together than just a mission. It's their outlook, how they perceive battle and war. It's all in sync. And of course, this is most easily, recognized because this is how we get the various paint schemes for Stormcast Eternals. Each storm host will have its own color of armor and heraldry and all that kind of stuff, and it's just a broad way of categorizing them by temperament and values. Now, rest assured, we are going to be doing a lore video on each of these major storm hosts, so let me know which ones you like covered first in the comments down below. And honestly, if that's the extent of how much you want to dive into their army structure, that's it. That's totally legit. You can just throw models on the table and be like, boom, this is Hammers of Sigmar. And that is totally legit. But the further you go, the real drama between each storm host and chamber that makes it up really begins to unfold. Because there's a lot more going on than just, divisions and ranks like, say, a Space Marine chapter, which is probably the closest equivalent. Because the way that the chambers interact with one another, to me, is really where a lot of that flavor and inner tension that drives and defines the Stormcast really rears its head. So we've broken the idea of Stormcasts into the various storm hosts. Within each storm host, they are all composed of various chambers. And this is the next kind of organizational level. And it's super important because essentially you have a bunch of warriors of similar temperament, generally speaking, but you need a diverse set of skills to make a good army. And this is where the chambers come in. Each is its own large organization tasked with training and maintaining an army devoted to warfare. Each of these chambers, if needed, can function as an independent army. They rarely do, but they can. So a great example of this is the most basic one, the Warrior Chamber. It has leadership, a diverse swath of units so it can meet any challenge, and this is roughly the equivalent of a company of Space Marines if you're 40k savvy. It's everything you generally need for a war, with the option of splashing in a few specific troops here and there. Now, the example we just went through of the Warrior Chamber is just one, because alongside it are the Harbinger and Exemplar chambers, and those three act as the main fighting forces for any storm host, meant to support one another with reserves or specialty units and that kind of stuff, and generally be able to act independently as military forces across the realms. This would be like infantry platoons, right? Where it's just like a lot of dudes and a lot of support to make them do what they need to do. But the other chambers are where things start to get kind of odd. You see, first of all, you have the Extremist Chamber, which specializes in all things dragon or dragon-y, and that's where you get all the mounted Stormcast Eternals, really, with the exception of the Gryph-hounds. They are specifically adept at siege, warfare, and rapid military strikes. So essentially, you can get just a handful of these dragon riders, Dracoth riders, and then they can smash through a fortress wall with the first wave and then clear out a wide beachhead for reinforcements to flood in with the second wave. So as Chaos forces kept building bigger walls, Sigmar was like, I need a better way to get right through them, and that is what the Extremist Chamber is. Behind them are the Vanguard Auxiliary Chambers. This is composed of the scouts and the hunters and the assassins of the Stormcast Eternals, and they're often attached to other chambers, like they'll just have a scout that knows the area attached to another warrior chamber or something. But generally they act somewhat independently. They focus on intel and reconnaissance and like I said, assassinations. If you want to see some of that in action, I really do recommend the book Black Talon First Mark. Neve Black Talon is basically Sigmar's headhunter for Chaos Lords. She's super rad. Then there is the Sacrosanct Chamber, the first released to combat the undead at the start of the Soul Wars. These are the wizards and arcane-focused Stormcast Eternals, and they have some really important side missions that bring them into conflict a lot. And so essentially they act as quality assurance for the Stormcast. They look for flaws in the reforging process, which makes, of course, other Stormcast very uneasy because they are essentially a built-in Inquisition for the Stormcast. But they also act as researchers and engineers for Sigmar himself, and they go out to the realms and they try to learn new magics and skills from around the realms to further boost the success of mortal cities, as well as hopefully find some cure to the flaw of the Stormcast, that when they reforge they lose a part of themselves. And I plan to do a dedicated video for each of these in the future, kind of breaking down the units that generally make them up, but this is really a sales pitch for each of them. And one thing to note, even if they're all from the same storm host, right? Like let's say we do Hallowed Knights again. Okay, we got some guys from the Warrior Chamber here, we got a Sacrosanct Chamber guy there, and they're all in the same army, right? Even if they're all from the same storm host, these different roles that they have and the way that they're trained can give Stormcast a completely different outlook on life. The way that they foster their values and experiences can cause friction with one another, and this often comes up in stories featuring Stormcast talking to one another. They might whisper about a comrade's change since they're reforging, keeping it secret and chill, or they may full-on argue about battle tactics and plans. They might take the advice of a scout, they might totally ignore them to their detriment. There's all these kinds of things once you have these different organizational structures trying to work together. So those are the broad strokes of the chambers. Now, within each chamber is a set of things called Conclaves. And simply put, this is just where a Stormcast really focuses on one method of combat. And this is the formations that you'll most likely recognize actual units on the table. They're divided into what's called Retinues. So for example, you could have the Hallowed Knights Storm Host be a part of the Sacrosanct Chamber in the Redeemer Conclave, third retinue, essentially meaning, hey, I'm a sequitur in the third retinue of the Redeemer Conclave of the Sacrosanct of the Hallowed Knights. I hope that hopefully going through that from the top level down and then from the down to the top, hopefully somewhere in there that makes a bit of sense for you. But that's essentially, rather than having like company numbers and things like that and different squad numbers, this is how they organize themselves. And so to me, the conclaves are really just here to say, this is the specific weapon that I wield to serve the purpose of my chamber. Again, each chamber adding to the war effort in a very specific way. And so it's this structure that allows each Stormcast Eternal to get hyper-specific training to fulfill their duty. Not everyone has to know every role in the army. They are honed to a pinpoint for each mission. And this is really where you get a sense of what units each chamber is made up of. It helps kind of paint a picture of the organization. However, you may be asking yourself, how come I never see such strict force organization in Black Library novels? Now, a lot of books have, a few liberators here, maybe a sequitur, or there's a judicator, just a few units smattered all together where they have to work together. And that's because chambers and conclaves, as we describe them, are fantastic structures for mega armies that can blanket a continent, but not so much smaller military actions like we often read about in Black Library books. The final tier of organization that I want to talk about today, and the one that you and I interact with the most, are called Brotherhoods. Instead of a single massive army, Brotherhoods are made up of units from across the expanse of the entire storm host, but they're created to fulfill a specific role. They're meant to be temporary formations to achieve a specific objective. But, depending on the mission, that temporary formation can last days, weeks, years, generations, anything like that. And so this would be essentially like a Lord Celestant saying, we need to go fight Nurgle in, this area of the Realm of Life and kill their warlord. And so he picks out a bunch of troops to do just that. I want a shield wall. Okay, so we got liberators. I want some Sacrosanct guys to deal with the demons and the chaos corruption. Cool, grab those too. And yeah, some Vanguard units to lead the way because they've likely scouted a safe path for us to get through the troops. Oh yeah, and we'll throw in some paladins for, major threats and chaos monsters and so on. And so this, in my opinion, is really what you and I as game, players get to interact with on the table. Yes, there are War Scroll battalions for narrative games to represent these massive chambers and conclaves, but generally speaking, this is what your Stormcast army represents. A collection of units from across the entire faction that have a singular task in usually annihilating your opponent. That task may be big or small. Like if you're playing Path to Glory, the task is to control and expand your territory to further solidify Order's grip on the mortal realms. That's a long-term task. Or it might be a collection of units meant to stop a specific ritual, and they never work together again. Now, as I like to end all my videos, I want to talk about why I think this is so cool. And the reason is I like the amount of depth here. Of course, like I said before, if your only interest level is just learning about the storm hosts and kind of their temperaments, and then from there you kind of go off and do your own thing, that's totally cool, and I super encourage that. For me, as far as the chambers and the conclaves, I'm not gonna personally get decals and label each one of my troops to be from a specific retinue, and I'm not doing all of that. That's a lot of brain work that I just don't have time for. But what I do enjoy is looking at this kind of thing and seeing that their time spent in Azir was one of highly structured warfare discipline training. But it leaves room for unique and flexible army design that Sigmar had the foresight to be okay, we need to address or be able to address these kinds of threats from hordes to mega monsters to magic to all kinds of different stuff. But within that, because he places such a emphasis on the autonomy of his leaders, like Lord Celestants and stuff like that, the real movers and shakers of the stories that you and I likely read in Black Library novels, there's so much autonomy that they can craft an army to do anything. And this is just the structure that facilitates that. And also that concept of brotherhoods is important to me personally because you can do whatever you want for your faction. I get lots of comments on my videos of people asking if the army that they want to create is lore friendly. Okay, and so they might read something like, oh, hey Doug, when I was reading the Realmgate Wars, it looks like the Hallowed Knights really emphasize the warrior chambers. And you know what? Back in those stories, they did because those were the only models available. But if that same person then asks, but I want to do sequiturs or vindictors, is that lore friendly if they're Hallowed Knights but not focused on the warrior chamber? And the answer is absolutely. You can do whatever you want. Every storm host has access to every option. Any restrictions that you put on that are totally self-imposed. It doesn't matter if the Hallowed Knights tend to favor the warrior chamber stuff, which honestly I don't even think they really emphasize that anymore, at least not much like they used to. But even if some kind of entry makes you think that, oh, this storm host really emphasizes X kind of unit, it doesn't mean that you can't use anything else. It's no less thematic. Again, everyone has access to everything. And the only thing that you need to do to write a, quote-unquote lore-friendly list, which is not a term that I really like, is just take the right tools for the right job. So if you won, boom, there you go, lore-friendly list, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. Not really, but you know what I mean. Take whatever you want, paint them how you want, love what you do. But as a closing thought, when you do that, just here's the fun part of taking units that seem kind of off the wall, right? If you just pick a weird smattering of units to put into your Stormcast army because you like the models and they don't work well together, who cares? The thing that I find interesting, and it's partially because of today's topic with the chambers and the retinues and conclaves and all that, is that each storm host colors the mentality of the soldiers within it. So what I mean by that is, our example earlier of the Hallowed Knights of the Sacrosanct Chamber and the Redeemer Conclave 3rd retinue, right? That's very specific. That same post is going to look very different from one storm host to the other because of their warrior culture. So you have total freedom to write that conclave's outlook on life, that retinue's outlook on life. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much versatility because there are so many layers to this onion that change its profile, I guess is kind of the metaphor that I've settled on, that you have freedom to craft whatever lore that you want. Whatever your question is, yes, it's lore friendly. And that's possible because of the sheer variety of outlooks and motivations and missions and training that go into making an entire Stormcast army. So I hope that addresses all of them. And I would love to hear your thoughts. Honestly, I feel like the idea of chambers, conclaves, and brotherhoods was better explained in this battle tome than the last one. It was a little bit weird in terms of where the hierarchy really lies, but I really enjoy it and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming.